Eagles Entertainment.
With the 10th pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, presented by Life Brand. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and it's time to get you ready for another week in college football. We've got a couple of people here to help me do exactly that. 4 more guests here on today's show. We're going to start things off with Mr. Relevant, where the executive director of the Reese's Senior Bowl, Jim Nagy, stopped by to talk through quarterback carousel, small school players that could stand out down in Mobile, and a loaded group of senior tight ends. We're going to hit on all of that, as well as the top prospects here for Penn State here in the state of Pennsylvania. So we'll talk all about that with Jim. We're going to keep things going on the All-Star circuit, talking with my buddy Eric Galko from the Shrine Bowl about one of those Penn State defenders along the defensive front. You do not want to miss that conversation with Eric. Then we're going to start to shift our attention to week 5 in college football. We're going to break down top matchups here with Ben Fennell. Saturday scouting, matchups to watch. We're going to do a mock draft from the Draft Network. We're going to take a look at some of the guys that you need to know going into this weekend. Then we round things out with our pick segment, Pick 6, with myself and Ross Tucker. Who's ahead right now as we're a handful of weeks into the college football season, and who could make a huge jump in the scoreboard this week? We're going to cover all that in Pick 6 with Ross. Thanks so much to everybody that has gone onto our Apple Podcast page and left us a review, left us a rating. Thanks so much to everybody that's done that lately. And please, if you haven't yet, jump on. It's the best way to throw us your support. Here's we're in the thick of things in college football, prepping you for next year's NFL draft. Thanks so much to everybody that has done that lately, like I said. That said, let's get things going here. Excited to start things off with Mr. Relevant and Jim Nagy.
All right, well, excited this week for Mr. Relevant to welcome back the executive director for the Reese's Senior Bowl, Mr. Jim Nagy. Jim has been on the show a number of times before. You can follow him on Twitter at JimNagy_SB. Jim, welcome back to the show, man.
Yeah, Fran, thanks for having me back on.
So let's get through a bunch of these players. And I'm excited to kind of pick your brain. I guess we'll start with the quarterback position. I know a player that you guys are really high on is Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati. Big test for him this week coming up against Notre Dame. But just want to ask you about Desmond and how you feel he separates himself from some of these other quarterbacks in this class.
Yeah, Desmond's been our highest rated guy through the offseason. We liked him so much last year. We have a jersey downstairs from last year's game. Because there was a chance we have to get that Nike order in early. And, the guys at Cincy were giving us a heads up that maybe if they won that Georgia bowl game that he might come out. So we got a jersey ready, that's for sure. But yeah, no, Desmond's a guy that I finally got to meet him this summer at the Manning camp. First and foremost, he's everything that the people at Cincinnati tell you. Really bright football guy, mature, just has a cool presence about him. And then, on tape, we know he's going to test well. Everyone at the school says he's going to run in the 4.5s, and you saw that last year. I think it was the SMU game. He had a really long breakout run, like a 90-yard run. A lot of arm talent. I know, he told me personally this summer that he was working on his deep ball accuracy. That was kind of the one thing he went into the offseason focusing on. And, he's done that. He's done a nice job early in the year. He's got a lot of weapons there. They got a really good team around him. That's a good defense at Cincinnati too. So yeah, Desmond's our top guy right now, and we'll see how the rest of the season goes. But this one will be a big one this week, going against his former defensive coordinator, Marcus Freeman, who should know him really well. And another good test for him.
When you look at this quarterback class in general, and it's interesting because obviously you had 5 guys go in the top 15 last year. You guys had a couple of those players. But when you look at the quarterback picture this year going into next year's draft, just overall thoughts on some other names that have kind of flashed to you?
Yeah, it's different than the last couple of years, at least for us. We've had a really good idea of the guys we've wanted, going into the year. And this year there's probably 2 or 3 that we know, and then it's got to sort itself out. I'm going to see Malik Willis on Saturday to play UAB. One of our other guys saw him play earlier in the year, so this will be our second look at Malik. Another guy saw Malik twice this summer, has all the physical stuff. At the last game we were at, one of our scouts connected with some of his friends on the staff, and they just raved about Malik's football intelligence and kind of, what he's done, making strides there in that area. So I'm excited to see Malik. Kenny Pickett's a guy that we invited to the game last year, and he decided to come back. So we really like how Kenny Pickett plays the position, and he's off to a really good start this year. And then there's just a lot of guys we're looking to elevate. I think the 2 guys over the first month of the season that have really done that Jake Hayner's a guy from Fresno State out west that's getting a lot of buzz, justifiably so. I talked to a scout the other day, and he said he was kind of on the edge with him, just intrigued by him. I think intriguing is a word that I like to avoid in scouting. It's kind of a fence riding term.
Right.
But he said the UCLA game really pushed him over the top. To see him lead that team back on the road, just the gutsiness that he showed. And then another guy like Bailey Zappi. We were at Western Kentucky the other night when they played Indiana, and he's a guy that kind of was on the radar last year at Houston Baptist, and went to Western Kentucky. He has the same coordinator calling plays this year, and just some cool moxie about him. He's another guy that knows how to play the game, has some sandlot to him, and I think both those guys are making kind of a push early in their senior year. Kind of reminds me of Gardner Minshew a couple years ago, Fran, in terms of a guy that was a little bit off the radar coming into the senior year that, Gardner put together that record-setting Pac-12 season as a senior. And these guys I'm kind of getting that feeling from both those guys.
So we've talked through a couple names that come from the group of five or independents. And really, when I think of the Senior Bowl, you always like to see some of those guys that come from the FCS or D2 level that go to the game and really see their star rise. Obviously, last year, the big story was Quinn Miners coming from Wisconsin Whitewater. Who are some of these other FCS players that you feel like have that ability to come down to Mobile and really help themselves here this draft cycle?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, last year, like you said, it was Quinn. Then the year before that, it was like Jeremy Chin and Kyle Duggar. I think we're back on the offensive line train like last year. Now, there are some other small school guys across the board, other positions, but you're just looking at the offensive line. You probably start with Trevor Penning at Northern Iowa is a guy. We had his bookend mate in the game last year, Spencer Brown. Yep. Trevor's a different player, but probably coming into Senior Bowl time for this year, Trevor will be rated higher for most teams than even Spencer was, who, he went in the third round to Buffalo. But Trevor's just another huge guy like Spencer was, but really nasty. Is taking his game to the next level this year. You see a lot of improvement. Braxton Jones from Southern Utah is another, like a true left tackle at the next level, a guy we've already seen play twice live. So there's a number of guys on that offensive line, and a guy that we got on a couple of weeks ago, Nick Sakelj from Fordham, is a really interesting player. We watched him over the summer, and you talk about a guy that's made a nice jump. It'd be Nick Sakelj. He really had his shot in a playoff game against Nebraska early in the year and really dominated in that game. And so we went and saw him last week. So there's going to be a number of small school guys in Mobile this year just on that offensive line group.
I want to stay on the offensive side of the football. We were talking earlier this week on the show with Dane about this tight end group. And I love the senior class of tight ends. And two of my favorites, Cade Otton, Ruckert over with Ohio State. But this group overall from top to bottom, really, really strong. I wanted to kind of pick your brain there and just kind of get a sense of who you felt you felt strongest about going into this game.
Yeah, it's probably my favorite position group. Even though we're probably only we're usually at about 8 guys in that group, so it's a limited number for us. But we could probably go pick 2 full rosters of tight ends and be happy with them. But yeah, the guys you mentioned, Cade Otton, Jeremy Ruckert, those guys are near the top. You got Trey McBride at Colorado State is off to a monster year catching the football. Charlie Kolar at Iowa State. I think what makes this group different is these guys are true dual tight ends. They can stay attached to the line of scrimmage. They can put their hand in the dirt and block you. And they're also, all of them can do good stuff in the pass game, although it looks different for all of them in the pass game, athletically, size-wise, but they're all adept. And then you throw in like Jake Ferguson from Wisconsin. Cole Turner's a guy we really like out in Nevada. Isaiah Likely at Coastal. I mean, it's a really, really deep group.
And like you said, all of these guys have that ability to be the combo weapon. We talked earlier with Brandon Brown earlier this week, the Eagles director of player personnel, about how important it is to understand these players' roles moving forward. And all these guys have that ability to be two-way players at the position, and really affects their value and how they're viewed. And they get that opportunity to kind of show off. Maybe they were used primarily as blockers in college and only showed flashed receiving skills, or vice versa. Well, now they can go to an all-star game setting and prove that they can do the other as well.
Right. I think, a perfect example of that is Trey McKitty from last year, the Georgia tight end. I mean, the guy caught 6 balls at Georgia last year, comes down to the Senior Bowl. He's got 11 and 8-inch hands, and he was just one-handing balls all week and ends up going in the 3rd round to San Diego. So, yeah, that's a perfect example. And And again, you talk about these combo guys. That's a really good term for it, Fran. I just know based off my experience in the league, it's really hard selling pass catching tight ends that can't block.
Right.
Because you're really tipping your hat when you put those guys in the field. So tight ends coaches and offensive coordinators in the NFL really bristle at those guys they have to be truly, truly dynamic players in the pass game for coaches to overlook deficiencies in the blocking, because obviously they don't want to tip their hat when they, in terms of play calling. So this will be a group that'll be easy for the coaches to get on board with once they get involved in the process.
Oh, you mentioned Trey McKitty there. Well, let's talk about his former teammate down there with the Georgia Bulldogs, pass rusher Adam Anderson, who has been a part-time player in the past, still kind of a rotational player, but a really impactful player. A guy I know you're very high on. Tell us what you see from Adam Anderson, the pass rusher from Georgia.
Yeah, that Georgia defense is hell on wheels. I was at the South Carolina game a couple weeks ago, and really the only two guys that stay on the field are the two safeties. 29 and 16, and then everybody else rotates, man. It's they keep them fresh and they come in and they all just play their tails off. So they're a really fun unit to watch. But Adam Anderson is a guy that, kind of jumped off the tape last year. Just if you look at his PFF numbers last year in terms of kind of the sack win rate, the pass rush win rate was like 32%, which is off the charts. So now that he's a first year starter in a little bit more of a full-time role, like you said, they still do wave those guys in and out pretty good. But, as Fran, most of these college guys can win with one thing, right? They can win with speed. They've got power, or maybe they're athletic. They got some slippery counterness to them. Adam can win with all three. The more tape you watch, you see that he can go speed to power on you. He has that, even though he's such a good athlete. So, really diverse pass rusher, plays really hard. And I think that, if you're selling Adam Anderson in a draft room, all you have to do is go to the special teams tape, because, he was out there on kickoff team at the South Carolina game, and I was sitting in the end zone actually. So it was kind of cool having that, like the same view you'd watch on tape, and to see Adam Anderson run down and blow people up and sell out and lay out and give up his body on special teams, is going to really make these teams bought in the competitor. So when you're talking about in that early round range, and those are the things that really separate those guys, these teams want to know what they're buying. And all you have to do is watch fourth down tape on Adam Anderson. You know exactly what you're getting from a competitive standpoint.
I love that context. Just trying to get a sense of the person, even if you're not saying, Adam Anderson is going to come in and be a four-core special teams player for us. Showing that he did that in college kind of speaks to that competitiveness. And even I love what you talked about there with just his pass rush plan and the different ways to win. I feel like doing some self-scouting of myself, I feel like I've overvalued in the past guys that maybe didn't have traits, but only had the pass rush plan. Hey, he can do a lot of different things. He's so great with his hands. But when you have a guy that's got traits and can win with one way, and now show up off that counter, it feels like when I talk with coaches, it's like, yeah, if you've got the fastball and then you understand the changeup, you don't need 8 moves in your bag. If you've got 2 or 3 that are really good, we're in good shape.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why he's a fun guy to watch. And he has the motor. When you've got the athletic, when you have the tools that Adam has and you're relentless, even if you're still developing, you're going to get to the quarterback a lot, because he can really, really close, and he's long. So he's going to disrupt a lot of throws. So this Georgia front seven, this Georgia defense alone, and we might end up with 8 defensive players off this defense, which would be an all-time record for the Senior Bowl.
Well, I would think that a defense that might be able to challenge that would be Penn State. You had a couple of guys that were offered to go to the Senior Bowl last year that ended up going back to school, taking advantage of that extra year of eligibility. Take us through this Penn State defense. I know they've got a couple other guys coming up now that could also end up in Mobile.
Yeah, up in your neck of the woods, Fran, this Penn State defense is really talented. Like you said, we had Tariq Castro-Fields, the corner, and Jaquan Brisker, the safety. Both accepted invites to last year's Senior Bowl, and the staff up there got them to come back, which is great for that team. Brisker's at the top of our safety boards. Castro-Field is right up there at corner. I think Jesse Luketa, if you go down a level, Jesse Luketa, the linebacker edge player, to our staff is one of the most underrated guys in college football in terms of his projection to the next level, in terms of just tools, length, speed, recklessness, power. Really intriguing player, and then you go down the line. Arnold Ebiketie for the Temple transfer is doing a lot of good things early in the year. He's kind of replacing Shaka Toney, who was here last year in Mobile. and brings a lot of the same things to the table, and might even be better against the run. So Arnold's a really interesting guy too, for us. And then you kick inside, you go down to even the next level, and PJ Mustipher is a real presence inside against the run inside. So one of our top interior defensive linemen. So yeah, that's a really good group. Ellis Brooks, the linebacker, makes a ton of plays, really productive guy. So, I would expect Penn State to win a lot of games this year just based off the way that defense plays.
Yeah, I was at the Temple Boston College game a couple weekends ago, and couldn't help but think, like, man, like they could really use Arnold Ebiketie. Watching him every single Saturday, and they lost. They've lost a bunch of guys transfer over the last few years. I mean, you guys had Quincy Roche down there last year. He's a former Temple guy. They've had a number of guys that have gone on to have impacts elsewhere. But Ebiketie really making an impact for Penn State. Well, Jim, thanks so much for joining us here once again on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand. We'll catch up with you at least one more time before we have that trip down to Mobile.
Yeah, that'll be great, Fran. Thanks for having me on, and enjoy another weekend of football.
Dim those lights. We're headed to the film room for the scouting report.
All right, well, excited to welcome back to the show Director of Football Operations and Player Personnel at the Shrine Bowl, my friend Eric Galko. Eric, welcome back to the show, man.
Appreciate it, Fran.
Well, let's get through an interesting player that we actually mentioned briefly in the last segment, but I want to ask you about Penn State pass rusher Arnold Ebiketie. And this is a guy that was on my radar for the last couple of years because he was previously at Temple, transferred over to Penn State, left the east part of the state, went west a little bit. But tell us when Ebiketie first jumped on your radar and get into the scouting report on this kid.
Yeah, really in 2020. I mean, he was a backup before then, and he flashed a lot. I think he had a couple of tackles for a loss in one game in 2020 and really emerged as a dynamic, impressive athlete pass rusher. A guy, when you're watching a group of five guys, especially O-line, D-line, you feel to identify who the good players are after a few snaps, and you could tell right away, okay, this kid has some real juice. And you go back and watch him further, and then you see his background. He's a former basketball player. He's an international player, played basketball growing up, late to football, so he's still kind of growing into that football kind of body and skill set. And then the way he played in 2020 as a pass rusher, Fran, you don't have to be dominant every play as a pass rusher, but if you're athletic and can make an impact on 5-6 plays a game, you'll have NFL attention too. And then so far in 2021, now at Penn State, kind of playing that Shaka Toney role, outside linebacker role, and he's doing a great job so far there.
How does he compare to Quincy Roche? Because Roche, making that same transfer away from Temple, went down to Miami, had a certain level of success down there for the Hurricanes in 2020. Now we see Ebiketie do the same thing with Penn State.
Yeah, I think Roche is probably a quicker, speedier guy off the edge. I think what Ebiketie does really well for a guy that's, got good length. He's maybe a shorter guy, 6'2", but has like 34-inch arms. I think he's a bit of a longer player. He can set up and counter and understand offensive tackle pressure. I think even better than Roche did, right? Roche can just beat you as a wide 9 guy consistently, especially at the college level. I think Ebiketie can do that. He has that kind of burst. But I think it's the control with his hands, the timing to take advantage when offensive linemen are off balance. And he did that against Wisconsin, a team that's known for great, reliable offensive linemen. But when he sees a guy off balance, he can really take advantage with that quickness and speed, and also using the length for a 6'2" outside linebacker. And
then lastly, just how important is it for a guy that, starts his career in a group of 5, transfers up to a power 5, keeps that level of production going? How big of a jump? How big is that for him to be able to show that he can make that jump? And then taking it the next step further into the All-Star game process, if he carries that over into that kind of a setting, what does that mean for his stock moving into the draft?
Yeah. For our staff, we talk about the term raw versus underdeveloped all the time with players. And if a guy is not showing what he needs to show as technique, then he's had 4 years to do it, he's underdeveloped, right? But if a guy has a reason to think, hey, this guy still might get better, that's raw, and we can work with that. I think Ebiketie going from starting high school, I think a sophomore, junior of high school, he started playing football at Temple. Took him a couple of years, but figured it out. Now at Penn State, now he's kind of putting that all together too. It just kind of shows NFL teams that pathway towards being successful. And I think if he can continue to show that against Big Ten competition, again, I think he had a sack against, or a tackle for loss against Wisconsin. That's a good team to get a sack against, known for their offensive linemen. I think if he kind of keeps showing that, even as a situational pass rusher, they rotate those guys in a lot. But I think if he can kind of show that all year long, end the year with, at Penn State, you don't need to have that many sacks to be a first-round pick, as we learned last year. But showing some production, some activity as an outside linebacker, and then the All-Star game process, I think for him, showing he can play some 3-4 outside linebacker. He does some drops at Penn State, but showing that at the All-Star game process could be great. At the Shrine Bowl this year, we're going to have a 3-4 defense, right? So he can play that defense if he wants to, as well as play some DN. So I think he can show off that kind of, hey, I'm still getting better as a player at an All-Star game process, which will be so important for a guy with really untapped potential like him.
Well, Eric, thanks so much for giving us a little bit of background info on Arnold Ebiketie. We will talk to you again soon. Thanks so much for joining us once again here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, presented by Life Brand.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, well, let's turn our attention to next week here in college football as I welcome in Ben Fennell to the show. Ben, excited to have you back, man. You missed this early week episode on your travel back from Vegas, but excited to get your thoughts here on this week in college football.
Yeah, fun slate of games. A little disappointed you guys continued the show without me. I kind of thought I wasn't there. It just would stop traffic completely. But you guys, kept it afloat. I haven't listened back yet for all the errors and mistakes and all the lapses in the rundown because I wasn't there to keep it together. But fun to be back with you.
Yeah, I'm expecting a full Frank Costanza at the beginning of next week's episode. I got a lot of problems with you people, and you're all going to hear about it when we start next week's show. But let's get into some of our big matchups. Honestly, man, this was a fun slate of games to go through because I feel like there are a lot of interesting one-on-one matchups, and also we do that category coming up the most to gain, like guys that could really use a big week. A lot of candidates for that one here as well. But let's do our one-on-ones. What's a big matchup to watch here for you this weekend in college football?
Well, I feel like early in the season right now, the Arkansas Razorbacks are one of the darlings of college football, getting some big upset wins, beating Texas A&M last week. But they play Georgia, number 2 Georgia Bulldogs coming to town. A lot of people talking about Traylon Burks and Jalen Catalon, and Trey Williams is starting to get some steam. Well, they got some guys in the trenches too, Fran, as they always do up there at Arkansas. Not big Myron Cunningham at left tackle, but center Ricky Stromberg, I think, is one of the best centers in the SEC, if not the country. He's a true junior. He's a 4-star, started all the games last year, played left and right guard as a true freshman in 2019. He's going to be battling big Jordan Davis. And I think it's going to be a great stock, of value for him and scouts watching that game against a 300 and I don't know what Davis is listed at these days, 350, 360, 370. Whatever he's listed at, it's on a good day. Right. But that's going to be just a great tape for scouts to look at for Stromberg, and a guy that's not getting a lot of attention. I think he's versatile, can play any of the interior spots. He's a taller guy at 6'4". Fran, he's not one of these quick off the ball guys. He's a guy that can seal you and move you right off the ball. So a lot of these centers now are coming out undersized, and they win with that initial quickness. That really isn't his game. He's that old school people mover, mauler, finisher type that can really get some movement. Well, mano a mano this week against big Jordan Davis. It's going to be a fun battle.
Yeah, it was a battle of heavyweights there on the interior. I've been thinking about Jordan Davis and players like that a lot just over these last few weeks. And I feel like my thought on his positional value has changed a lot just over the last calendar year, but certainly since the start of the NFL season, man. We're watching around a lot of teams around the league, and obviously you have all the different, the multiple fronts and the way that people shuffle players in and out. We've talked in the past about the upscale, the uptick in too high looks, and how teams are playing with lighter boxes, trying to entice people to run. I feel like when you have that kind of a front, you need some of these guys that can either take up multiple gaps or just dominate one-on-one. And if that's the case, maybe Jordan Davis is more valuable than we thought before.
I think every defensive line coach, defensive coordinator, head coach, GM, owner are all going to have different views on this. And it changes from year to year based on what teams are coveting those players.
Yep.
But I promise you, defensive tackles are needed in this league. Run plugging defensive tackles are needed in this league. That's not the question. Where do you spend the draft capital on those players is the question. Yep. And it's different every year. We see Danny Shelton's and Vita Vea's go early. And we see Andrew Billings and Lecky Fotu's go late. And I don't know why I threw Billings in there. There's obviously better example players. But, the Steve McClendons and Albert McClellans, those big burly nose tackles, Snacks Harrison, Linval Josephs. There's a reason why they didn't go high in the draft. But they're needed in this league. They're wanted in this league. Just a matter of where you covet that type of position.
And, I think the Billings one is interesting because he was in mock drafts all through his –
he was one of the better interior players that year and one of the better one techs and showed some flash to get up the field. And I know he had some injuries as well. I think might have had a knee or something he was dealing with, but he slid further than I expected. And I think the Bengals took him in the 4th round or something.
All right, let's get to some of these skill positions. I'm going to look at Penn State and Indiana. You and I big fans of Indiana corner Tywan Mullen. He'll have his hands full this week with the speedster from Penn State, Jahan Dodson. And this is a guy that has been a primary pass catcher for the Nittany Lions this year. He's been their big play guy. So watching this Indiana secondary, and namely Tywan Mullen, the true junior out there for the Hoosiers, go up against Dotson, that's a really interesting one-on-one matchup. Certainly a big one to watch. I know you've studied both of these guys. You've got a ton of background info on Mullen, his brother, obviously Trayvon Mullen, who's now worked with the Las Vegas Raiders. But thoughts here on this matchup, because I think this is a big one here in the Big Ten.
Yeah, it's going to be a real fun battle. Jahan Dotson had 4 for 94 and a touchdown last year to open the season and really got things started. So Tywan, I think he needs to show up. And I think the expectations are really high this year from that whole Indiana program, both sides of the ball, and Michael Penix and some of those studs on defense. So I think it's going to be a really good game for Tywan Mullen's individual stock, certainly.
All right, so we talked about earlier, there's a lot of candidates for this category. Most to gain. Who's a guy that could really benefit from a strong performance this week? I'll bounce this one to you first.
You know where I'm going, Fran, because they're still not ranked. And don't give me that coaches poll stuff. We're talking the AP poll, the big boys, Kentucky Wildcats. What do they have to do? They're 4-0. They went to South Carolina, face SEC competitions on the road, beat them. What else do you want them to do, Fran? They got to knock off Florida Gators this week. I think Florida Gators are number 8 or 10 in the country. And I want to see big Darian Kennard, the left tackle, Dari Rosenthal from LSU. Not a lot of people talking about Luke Fortner at center. And they got a really good Florida defensive front to face, whether it's Zachary Carter, Jeremiah Moon, Brenton Cox, this Gervin Dexter kid that was knocking back Alabama offensive linemen on the goal line a couple of weeks ago as they nearly upset the Crimson Tide. There's a lot of NFL caliber players on that defensive front. So do the Kentucky offensive linemen. So one more week of them not ranked. I love them. I think they're a really fun team to watch, both sides of the ball. Will Levis, Chris Rodriguez is a 220-pound bulldog of a running back. I guess they got to knock off, number 10 team in the country to get some love.
You think they got a shot?
They absolutely have a shot. Of course they have a shot. And this is just all part of the plan. This is just the next step on the way to that Kentucky Wildcat National Championship. You heard it here first.
The next rung in the ladder. I'm going to stay in the SEC. And there are a handful of opportunities here for some big-name quarterbacks. We're going to talk, or we've talked this week already about Desmond Ridder and the challenge he has going on the road against Notre Dame. I'm going to go Ole Miss quarterback Matt Corral, a personal favorite of mine, going up against Alabama. And this can be one of those huge matchups. We're going to talk about it a little bit later with Ross as well. Matt Corral, huge opportunity here against the Crimson Tide to see what he can do. And it's not even necessarily about them winning the game, although that would be big. It's about just playing under composure, not having a complete meltdown. If he can just go out and have even a solid performance, not turn the ball over, not look overly rattled, keep them in position, keep them within a tight ball game, I think he will come out as one of the big winners of this week.
Yeah, and he had a really strong game last year against them. He was 21 of 28 for 365, 2 touchdowns, no picks. I thought he really took care of the ball and didn't put it in harm's way, which is, objective number 1 against a Nick Saban type of defense. Don't hurt yourself with, the turnover throws and things like that. And I think it's going to be a really good game for him. I'm really excited for his opportunity.
All right, let's go to the next one here. Prospects after dark. Who's a guy that's playing in a game, start time 8 p.m. or later, that you want to profile here?
You go first on this one.
All right, so I'm going to go with an interesting one in that, look, if you're an East Coast guy and, if you're busy during the day and you come back at night, you're like, all right, I'm going to turn some college football on. You typically miss out on a lot of the big SEC games. And usually you're probably going to miss out on Derek Stingley, the star corner for LSU. However, this week, Auburn and LSU, 9 p.m. start time on ESPN. So this is a good opportunity to get eyes on some good players here for both Auburn and LSU, but certainly Derek Stingley, he's been in the top 5 of pretty much every mock draft that we've looked at so far here on the show. Stingley going up against Auburn. The big thing you want to watch here with him, he's been up and down as a tackler here this season. You want to see how he does against this Auburn run game, but Derek Stingley is certainly one of the most gifted players in this draft, regardless of position. He is a guy you want to be able to watch, and you have your chance to get him if you're a night owl to be able to watch some college football late on Saturday.
Well, I'm staying in that game, and I'm staying on that side of the ball. And linebacker Damone Clark, LSU linebacker wearing number 18, was the SEC Defensive Player of the Week last week. Had 15 tackles against Mississippi State. Was a 2020 freak lister for all sorts of athleticism and strength. He had a horrible year last year, replacing Patrick Queen and Jacob Phillips in that championship level defense. Big Auburn running back group coming to town. Tank Bigsby, Sean Shivers. They have a true freshman as well that breaks free every now and then. Damone Clark, look out for number 18 in the middle there.
I like it. That's certainly another name. LSU, as always, they've always got guys.
I got to catch up on Mike Jones as well, who transferred over from Clemson. I haven't heard too much about him. I know he wanted to play true Mike linebacker. I haven't watched a lot of Clemson yet, LSU yet this year, but keeping an eye out for him as well. BJ
Ojolari off the edge is a guy to keep an eye out for the future. Certainly the receiver, Keishon Butte, is another name to watch as well on the opposite side. Let's go now to our call our shot. Predict a big game here from a big name prospect or even a lower level prospect for this weekend, and give a little bit of background on your pick.
And if you've been listening, you all know at home, I've yet to miss in this category. Nailed every single one so far.
Never lost.
I'm just joking. I've been way off on everyone, but this is another week, another opportunity. So let's get it right. I'm going to go with Cincinnati edge rusher Najee Sanders. Haven't heard much about him this year. He plays Notre Dame. They just beat Indiana 2 weeks ago. They're heading back to the state of Indiana for the other Power 5 team in Indiana, and that's Notre Dame, coming off a good win against Wisconsin last week, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Yep.
The Jack Cohen rivalry game. But Cincinnati edge, Najee Sanders, he leads the team at 13 pressures. No sacks yet this year. Expectations are high. Return for a senior year. I think he's going to have a big game against a big-time opponent in Notre Dame. I know Cincinnati and Luke Fickell want to knock off a Notre Dame caliber team and really have a statement win. I mean, back-to-back on the schedule at Indiana, at Notre Dame. Any group of 5 team, Fran, that's circled on the calendar. They had a week to prepare in between those for Notre Dame. I'm expecting a big game. And whether that's Ahmad Gardner or Kobe Bryant on the defense, it's a veteran group out there. But Najee Sanders, I think he's going to get a couple sacks under his belt and make a couple splash plays. We'll be hearing about him on Twitter over the weekend.
Who do you like in this game? I'm going to give my pick in the next segment. Who do you like, Cincinnati or Notre Dame?
This Cincinnati team will punch you in the mouth. And do not let them have a window in the first quarter. I think they're going to come out hungry. I think they're going to be fired up. I think they're going to be healthy. I think they're going to be fresh. And I think Desmond Ridder is going to get his signature win of 2021. I don't know what happens down the stretch. They're going to have some tough games in conference and whatnot. They might have a hiccup or two. But I think this stretch was circled to start the season. It's going to be circled from scouts watching Desmond Ridder, and certainly a statement win and a statement opportunity for this program.
I like it. All right, well, let's go to our next category here. Or actually, no, I'm going to give my call your shot. I'm going to go with Iowa State running back Breece Hall. A little bit of a slow start here for the Cyclones. Obviously, they start the season as the top 5 team, top 7 team. They've had a rough start to the season, haven't been exactly what they were hoping for, but Breece Hall, still one of the best backs in the country with his size and his patience, his ability to be a combo back. Going up against Kansas, I feel like this is a get-right opportunity here for this offense. 7 o'clock, FS1. They've got them at home. I just feel like this feels right for an Iowa State blow-up. So looking at that offense, namely Breece Hall, I like him in this game. Let's go to our next one here. Comparison chat. Use an NFL comp to profile a prospect playing this weekend. And I'm going to go with a player. I'm pretty sure you just tweeted about him recently. Boston College. Love this offensive line, namely the left guard, Zion Johnson, and the center, Alec Lindstrom. I want to talk about Zion Johnson here, a player that I watched not this summer, but summer of 2020. Really liked his athleticism. I liked him on the move. I thought that he was a really good run blocker, really good feel for their zone schemes. He uses his hands well. Pass protection, he's got light feet, a little bit undersized. And I thought that when he played a tackle last year a little bit, didn't look quite as natural as what he's played at guard. Well, he's back at guard this season, and he looks really good. And when I first watched him, he reminded me a lot of Shaq Mason, who's been a really good player for the New England Patriots for a few years. And it's funny, Shaq Mason, he played in that triple option offense down at Georgia Tech before entering the NFL. Zion Johnson, before he transferred to Boston College, he played in the triple option offense. So he was still kind of figuring things out from a pass protection scheme as well. So kind of interesting that both guys had that in their profile. But Zion Johnson, Shaq Mason, I think Zion Johnson could be a long-time NFL starter. I really like him. Watch him against Clemson this week, 7:30 on the ACC network.
Yeah, I did put on the Boston College offense tape yesterday. I went to watch Alex Lindstrom, Ben Petrula, Tyler Vrabel, really good offensive line. Fran, I don't know who any of these running backs were. I think they were in 23, 24, and 25 for Boston College. They're all built rocked up, running through arm tackles. It just seems like they have a type out there, whether it was Andre Williams, A.J. Dillon, the Bailey kid from 2 years ago. Just really good-looking stable of running backs out there. They're going to be really excited to play Clemson. But the ACC, it's obviously going as everyone predicted this year, right, Fran?
Exactly.
4-0 Boston College. Who else is 4-0? How about Wake Forest?
Yeah.
Nobody's talking about Wake Forest. Give me a prospect on Wake Forest. You don't know any. That's right. So we're going to talk about receiver Jaquari Roberson. And this is a really productive receiver. He took advantage of Sage Surratt opting out last year, had a huge year in 2020 with Sam Hartman. This is a 3-level receiver. He plays out of the slot, gets a lot of featured touches, had 6 plays of 40-plus last year in a variety of ways. And he did it in whether it's yards after catch quick game, the stuff over the middle, or the deep over the top stuff. Really good at the top of routes, transitions the yards after catch really well, speed cuts pretty well, has good hands and adjustments. He reminds me a little bit of Mario Manningham. And I don't think this guy is going to be a blazer. I don't think he's a 4-4 guy. I think he's just a savvy 4-5-5 guy that can win at every level with good hands, can win outside, win inside, probably do some special teaming if you need him to. Just a guy people aren't talking about. This Wake Forest team's 4-0. We need to talk about some players. Tackle Zach Tom is an interesting player, and a couple interesting defenders as well, like Luigi Villian. Great name, Michigan transfer, former 4-star, 14 QB pressures, 4 sacks this season. He's finally healthy. Another kid coming down from Canada. But the Wake Forest Demon Deacons, 4-0, and they are hot.
I like it. It's not often that we're talking about the Deeks here on this show, so glad you brought one to the table. Let's close out the segment with our mock draft roundup. This week, we're going to take a look at Jordan Reed's latest mock draft over at the Draft Network. He's got the Eagles picking at number 8 and at number 14, so only 2 first-round picks. The Colts do have their first-round pick in this mock draft. So, first pick, Eagles picking at 8 overall, select Clemson corner Andrew Booth. And here is the blurb from Jordan. He says the Clemson defense is playing really well this year, and a big reason behind that has been the play of Booth. A player that has the competitive fire and the alpha mentality of Marcus Peters, but the athleticism of some of the high-level first-round corners that we've seen in the past. Adding Booth Jr. to a secondary that still needs help could help head coach Nick Sirianni and defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon continue to retool the defense. So, Ben, thoughts on Andrew Booth here in Eagles Green as a top 10 pick?
Yeah, really interesting player. I think is more of a zone scheme corner, which we're going to be playing a lot of zone under Jonathan Gannon's system here in Philadelphia. So I like the fit there, whether it's a, kind of a cover 2 force player, or whether it's side saddle cover 3 stuff. He could play it off coverage and quarters. Just I have some issues with him in press man and the turn and run stuff. So I think he's a good scheme fit here in Philadelphia. You got to just love his height, his length, his ball skills, his explosiveness, just that general athleticism. I think anybody would covet to have in a defensive back room, but I think he fits the scheme here and certainly a intriguing athlete.
So that was the pick at number 8. Just a quick look at the top 7. Kayvon Thibodeau, number 1 to Detroit. Derek Stingley, number 2 to the Jets. Number 3, the Jaguars take Kyle Hamilton, the safety from Notre Dame. Malik Willis, the quarterback 1, number 4 overall to the Houston Texans. Number 5, Cincinnati Bengals offensive tackle Evan Neal. Sam Howell, it's quarterback 2, number 6 overall to the Atlanta Falcons. And then the Giants take USC edge rusher Drake Jackson. So, Ben, thoughts on that top 7 and Sam Howell sneaking in there? What are your thoughts overall on that grouping?
Bunch of guys that we're starting to feel the consensus on. A lot of these defensive players, Evan Neal kind of being that first tackle, Drake Jackson.
Like that's the core, right?
We're getting to that point.
Then becomes like, do you have a quarterback in that mix or not?
Yeah, and it's it's that time of year for a quarterback boggle that I mentioned 2 weeks ago. It's just you see all different shakings and rankings of these quarterbacks. But the way Sam Howell's played the past couple of weeks, this really isn't how his stock has been trending. I think some other guys have been leapfrogging him, and he's been a guy that some people compare to a Baker Mayfield, and he reminded me a little bit of Bryce Petty at times. A guy that was really productive in college as well in a similar RPO shot play system. That North Carolina team's been struggling this year, and I haven't watched the tape yet. I haven't watched them on TV a whole lot, but a lot of the narratives and some buzz I'm hearing, just his stock has taken a dip a little bit.
All right, let's go to the next pick here. As the Eagles select again at number 14, they take Michigan defensive lineman Aiden Hutchinson. Here's the blurb from Jordan. Now fully healthy, Hutchinson has been a terror off the edge. With Brandon Graham's Achilles injury and Derek Barnett in the middle of a contract year, the options for the Eagles at the top of the depth chart for the foreseeable future are thin. Hutchinson gives them a young and energetic option with the skill set that translates immediately to the next level. So, Ben, I know you're a big fan of Aiden Hutchinson. I'm a big fan of Aiden Hutchinson. We've talked a lot about Aiden Hutchinson. 14, like, do you feel like this is like the range we're talking, or do you feel like he could go even higher?
He could go even higher.
I think so, right?
I was literally about to say 14. I don't know if he's going to make it there.
Yeah, right.
So he's a guy that's really, really fun. And if you're just looking for a hard-nosed, early down run defender that can slide in third down, just a tough, versatile player with good length, and this is him. He's a different style than even Thibodeau and Drake Jackson. There may be some defensive coordinators, and I'm going to say this now, that may covet his style of play more than those two. Yeah. And yes, I said Kayvon Thibodeau. I really, really believe that, Fran. This is a heck of a football player. And, when you look and wonder how, the J.J. Watts of the world, were coveted and turned into what they are, he's got a lot of that going on. And there aren't those types of players that grow on trees and they don't come out every year. He may be a really special player, and he's my type of guy. He ain't looking to run around anybody. He's a power player, a good run defender, good in space, plays hard, checking all the boxes of, defensive ends that I like in this league.
And again, going back to what we said earlier about Jordan Davis, where it's like, all right, like you're going to play light boxes, you're going to play multiple fronts. Even if you're not a light box team and you want to be a multiple front team, well, this is the kind of guy that fits that, right? Hutchinson can line up, as wide out as a 9 tech, or he can come in and play some 3 tech, right? I mean, he can do all of those things in between. So when you have a guy that has that level of position versatility, I think you're going to be seen as very valuable. He can fit in any kind of scheme. And just a really talented player. You feel good about him off the field. Hutchinson, a really, really fun prospect. Real quick, just to get a sense of the guys that go or that have been going around him, the 2 picks before Hutchinson. Carolina at number 12 took DeMarvin Leal from Texas A&M, the defensive tackle. And then 13, the Indianapolis Colts select Kentucky right tackle Darian Kennard. The 2 players that went after Hutchinson at 15, the Chargers taking Adam Anderson, the pass rusher from Georgia. And at 16, the Las Vegas Raiders select Georgia defensive tackle Jordan Davis. So we see Davis go off the board in the top half of round 1 in this one here, Ben. Any thoughts on just that grouping of players?
I think it's really contentious argument right now with Adam Anderson and his scheme fit and production and where you play him and if he's a early down player or not. Jordan Davis, if the way Jonathan Hankins is playing right now, I don't know if they're going to be needing another 1 tech out there with the 3-0 Las Vegas Raiders. But Jordan Davis, if they're a team that kind of covets that body, that run plugger, this could be the ballpark. This is DeMarvin Leal at 13 there, Kennard, some really big boy football players there.
All right, so to wrap it up, I always try and pick all right, what's one other category we can use to talk about a player? Look, it's fall. It's feeling fall weather, tailgate weather. Get some ribs, get some barbecue going. I like some sauce, some barbecue sauce going on with the ribs. So one saucy pick here outside the top 10. You can take saucy however you want to define saucy. I'll let you go first here. One saucy pick outside the top 10.
Well, let's stay with the low-hanging fruit, sexy category. Everybody just wants to know where the quarterbacks are going to be pegged here. A little bit of a disagreement with Sam Howell being pegged at 7 based on his recent play and some buzz. And that just goes further on. I mean, Carson Strong, how about to the Pittsburgh Steelers there in the middle of the first round? A guy that certainly his stock is going that way and could look like a first rounder. And one of the more interesting conversations around the NFL circles right now are the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yep.
And Big Ben's health, Big Ben's future, and really the conversation about the lack of preparation for after Ben and what they're currently dealing with. So quarterback is going to be objective 1 with this team, whether it's free agency or the draft. Start pegging in somebody. And Carson Strong, based on what Big Ben looks like and that style of offense with Matt Canada, I think Carson Strong would be a really good fit.
Yeah, the quarterback situation, I think it's just to be really interesting to watch just moving forward into this draft. If the guys do get bumped up or if they get kind of littered throughout round 1, certainly a team like a Pittsburgh or a Washington, if you're picking in the teens, if you're picking even the early 20s, you kind of like the way that you envision this quarterback class going, where maybe there's a couple guys that could kind of sprinkle in through the first round. Whereas if it becomes an arms race and now it's like, oh, well, 4 of these guys now are going to go in the top 11, now you're a little bit worried. But it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out. I'm going to stay in that same position. Spencer Rattler, number 20 to the New Orleans Saints. I love the fit. I love the idea of it. There was all the buzz about Sean Payton being in on Patrick Mahomes the year he came out, and there's been some of those comparisons, obviously, with Rattler to Mahomes. I love that's one that that's becoming kind of a chic pick. We've seen that with a handful of mock drafts already here so far this fall, but that one really intrigued me. I kind of like the idea of Spencer Rattler to Sean Payton.
So just put you on the spot right now. Who can we know? We're sitting here end of September. This is right about when the Joe Burrow stock started, the Zach Wilson stock started. Who's ready to crash the party with some signature wins here? Is it the Fresno State kid? Is Jack Cohn a darling Bruin? What if Desmond Ritter throws for 6 touchdowns and 400 yards against Notre Dame this weekend and crushes them on the road?
You continue to be a Matt Corral hater. You don't even mention him as a possibility here.
I figured that was the one you were going to initiate. I left it for you there. I left it for you.
No, that's the thing is that I do feel like this is a big weekend for that conversation, right? Because obviously if Cincinnati upsets Notre Dame, or if Matt Corral goes out and has a huge game against Alabama, now that buzz starts to build, right? That legend starts to build, and some of that momentum will start to roll. So I think when you look at this week, I think that will be big for those narratives. That said, I mean, with what Corral has done, I said it last week on the show, he might be the early favorite for the Heisman, right? I mean, just the numbers that he's putting up. He didn't play last week, so it's a little bit soft now, but he scored 7 touchdowns the week before. If he can keep producing at the level that he's producing, obviously everybody loves Lane Kiffin, and like you know what I mean? Like he's built some equity there in the minds of like voters and the media and stuff like that. Like that he's going to be up in New York for that ceremony.
I just think it's exciting to see the ones kind of take an opportunity and just run with it for the season. I mean, yeah. Jake Bentley at South Alabama is 3-0, Fran. Who knows? Who knows where it can go?
But to your point, I mean, you brought up Carson Strong. Like, there's a lot of buzz, but at this point, I feel like the buzz was starting to build on Zach Wilson, right? It was like, oh man, like make sure you stay up late and watch Zach Wilson, late on Saturday night. Oh, watch him 10 o'clock taking on Hawaii or Colorado State or whoever it was they're playing on any given week. I feel like we're starting to get a little bit of that with Carson Strong, that maybe not to that extent, but Strong is another guy that I feel like is going to be making a push here as well.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, no question. Well, Ben, we'll be talking to you this coming week about what we see this weekend here in college football. Make sure you go subscribe to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Ben and I talking X's and O's each and every week over on that show as well. Ben, thanks so much, man. We will talk to you next week.
Now it's time for Pick Six.
All right, well, let's wrap this show up with my friend Ross Tucker from Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Ross, Pick Six, you picked up a game on me this week, the big deciding games. You picked Louisville over Florida State. I took the Seminoles. I tried to give some more faith there in FSU. They did not come through for me. Another one, though, I was able to pick up Kentucky. I had some faith in them, so I was able to tie it back up. But then your faith in Notre Dame came through. Always knew you were a big Notre Dame Irish fan when you come through. Now you've got a one-game lead on me here as we conclude week 4.
I love it. Yeah, Kyron's yard per carry. That was good. Kentucky's margin. I didn't even check those. Did Kentucky beat them by a lot compared to that?
So Michigan State won by 3. Kentucky won by a touchdown. So it wasn't a huge blowout, but Kentucky came through for me for sure.
We got close on our upset specials again.
Dude, we are on the money with those, man. Yeah, we really have. We've picked a lot of really close ones, and we'll see if we can keep it going here this week. I will say the one area where you are just crushing me is the straight pick'ems we do. I believe I have the records here. You are 6-2 on your straight pick'ems here so far through 4 weeks. I am 3-5. So everywhere else, I feel pretty good. I've got the advantage. Those you are absolutely crushing me, and we'll see if that continues this week. We'll start in the SEC. Auburn Tigers versus the LSU Tigers. Who do you like here in this big SEC matchup?
As usual, I am totally floored that 2 teams in the same division of the same conference have the same mascot. I mean, it's just unreal to me. But that's what we got. I'm going with LSU, man. They got their loss out of the way against UCLA, and they've been playing better since then. It's a night game, Death Valley. Place will be crazy. Auburn kind of struggled. I don't know if it was just after the whiteout game or what, but now they got quarterback questions. I don't like that, whether it's Finley or Ricks. Give me a LSU.
I like Auburn here. Going on the road, obviously it's going to be a tough atmosphere for them. And Keyshawn Butte for LSU is a stud, true sophomore wide receiver. But I really like this Auburn defense, especially up front, to make things tough for the LSU quarterbacks and certainly for that run game. So I will take Auburn here in their battle of the Tigers. Let's go to number 2 here. This one's a fun one. Notre Dame against Cincinnati. Marcus Freeman, the defensive coordinator for the Irish. He was previously with the Bearcats. Take us through this one. Who do you like here, Notre Dame versus Cincinnati?
Yeah, I like Cincinnati. Notre Dame has been hanging in there, but man, they've been hanging in there. Now, they pulled away late against Wisconsin, but they've had a bunch of tough games in a row. Their quarterback situation is up in the air after Jack Cohn got hurt last week against his former team. Meanwhile, Cincinnati, man, they have been geared up for this. This is their Super Bowl. They need this win for the college football playoff. I know it's at South Bend. I think Luke Fickell gets a signature win here. I like the Bearcats.
So you have been supporting Notre Dame like pretty much every single week we've done this segment so far this season. I have been going out against Notre Dame with pretty much everyone. And as I've mentioned, that has not treated me well, including last week did not treat me well. I'm going to flip the script this week. You're taking Cincinnati. I'm going to take the Irish. I know that Jack Cohn is banged up. They've got some injuries on both sides of the football. I like the Irish here at home in a close one. But Cincinnati, you mentioned their emotions are going to be high. They've been gearing up for this. All their seniors returned on both sides of the football. They've been ready for this kind of statement win. I just think the Irish come through with this one. We'll see if they can come through for me. Let's get to our over-under. 4.5 is the number here on the over-under. We're going to take a look at this big SEC battle, Alabama against Ole Miss. And that number 4.5 is going to represent total touchdowns, both running and throwing, and we'll throw receiving in there as well, for Ole Miss quarterback Matt Corral. He had 7 touchdowns the last time he took the field a couple of weeks ago. What do you think here? Over-under, 4.5 total touchdowns for Corral against the Crimson Tide.
Under. I mean, 5 touchdowns? That's a lot.
Dude,
against Alabama
this season. I felt like it was a little high, but don't you feel like this could be a shootout? I mean, they scored over 50 points last year against the Tide. Now, Corral only accounted for 2 touchdowns in that game, but I don't know. That's why I made it a high number, and obviously it's a high bar. I agree with that. I took the under, but I didn't think it was like a super high number.
I guess it's not super high given what they did last year. But 5 touchdowns is a lot, man. It's 35 points plus, you can easily get to the 3 and then you run it in. It's not him running it in. You can score points without it being the quarterback. I like the under. If you're the one that set up 4.5, you should have to take the over.
Well, that's the thing is that I feel like I'm sucker betting both of us taking the under, and he'll end up scoring 6 touchdowns in an Alabama win. But we'll see how that one goes. Let's go to game number 4 here. And either or, all right? So Boston College taking on Clemson. Both teams have injuries on both sides. But Boston College leading wide receiver Zay Flowers or Clemson leading wide receiver Justin Ross. Which of these 2 players has more catches in this game?
I'm going to go with Justin Ross for 2 reasons. Clemson is really struggling offensively, and they got to go to their studs. They got to go to Justin Ross and feed him. Plus, we know Boston College lost their quarterback, Dracovic, earlier in the year. So I think it's close, but I'll take Justin Ross.
I went back and forth on this, and I initially I had written down Justin Ross. But the more I think about it, you're right. Obviously, Dracovic is out, and that's a loss certainly for Boston College. But I feel like, look, they want to feed the ball to Zay Flowers. And if they're going to win this game, they need their studs to be able to come through for them, right? They need their best players to make big plays. And I can imagine a scenario where they are just feeding the ball to Zay Flowers, whether it's on bubble screens, shallow crosses, some of those deep balls as well. We've seen them connect on some of those so far this season. I will take Zay Flowers here and go on the opposite side of you. Let's go number 5 here, our high-low. What number is higher? Arkansas wide receiver Treylon Burks yards per catch this week against Georgia, or the Bulldogs margin of victory? This was another really, really tough one, I felt like.
Treylon Burks yards per catch. I think Arkansas is pretty good. I think Arkansas can hang with Georgia. I think Treylon Burks is really good and is a big play stud. I think he can easily be in the high teens, maybe even in the 20s yard per catch. And I think Arkansas can keep it to like a 1 score, maybe a 10-point game, something like that. I love Burks on this one.
I went back and forth on this one too. And I think ultimately the way I ended up landing on Georgia. And the reason why is because if you look at Treylon Burks so far through 4 games, his first 2 games, the yards per catch has been in the double digits. And a lot of that was like the short gadgety stuff. We're trying to get him the ball fast. And so that yards per catch number was a little bit down. The last 2 weeks, we've seen more of the vertical game. The question is that Georgia secondary going to allow stuff over the top? And is that front going to allow Arkansas the time to be able to connect on some of those deep throws? I ended up going Georgia here. Didn't feel great about it because I love Treylon Burks, as everybody on this podcast knows. But I will go with the Bulldogs here. Let's go with our upset special, man. Round us out. Who do you like here?
Man, there's a lot. Every week there's a bunch that entice me, but I got one that, man, I hope this happens for these kids. I'm picking UConn.
Oh, I thought about this one. Yeah.
UConn, I've done 2 of their games this year. They played Wyoming very tough. Could have won that game. Vanderbilt, not very good. UConn, now that they're playing a bunch of true freshmen, they actually look better. I think UConn gets the upset over an SEC team, which would just be amazing.
That would be a big win for them. I mean, weren't they like 45-point dogs to Army earlier this year? Like, obviously they started off really, really tough, and they've already had a head coaching change and all that. But that would be a huge win for certain for the Huskies program. I'm going to go Big Ten, man. Northwestern over Nebraska. I like this one for some reason. I feel like a lot of people feel like Nebraska comes away with this one fairly easily. I like Northwestern here to come up with the W. Obviously, they've lost some players on both sides, but they've got a lot of talent as well on both sides that have come back to that program. Pat Fitzgerald obviously had them in the Big Ten title game a year ago. Let's go with Northwestern with the Wildcats. Dude, looking at this, we were only on the same side for 1 pick this week. This is going to be huge. Either you're extending your lead or I'm taking a nice decisive one here. This should be a fun weekend of college football.
Huge swing game, huge swing week. I love it. Can't wait. Maybe you can catch up to me finally.
So we'll see how it goes. Ross, we will talk to you next week, man. Thanks once again for joining us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand.
Sounds great.
Another great slate of guests here this week. Outstanding stuff there from Ross Tucker, obviously Ben Fennell, but also Eric Galko and Jim Nagy, rounding out the all-star circuit there with those 2 guys. Outstanding stuff as always. Before we get you going, again, the last thing I always want to remind you guys, make sure you go into our Apple Podcast page, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. It's the best way to throw us your support here as we get you ready for next year's NFL Draft. That said, we'll be back next week breaking down all things here, college football and the NFL Draft, right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand.